Hi YouTube, welcome to another video with the aviation enthusiast on Airwaysim. Today is the third installment on the 50 tips for new players. If you haven't seen the first two episodes, please check the links here to make sure you've watched those two videos first before moving on to these ones. So, as I said, this is the third installment in a series of 5 videos. So I'll be going through the tips 20 to 30, and hopefully these will help you in making sure that you have a successful airline. So tip number 21 is to understand the key slot times you will need in your HQ or in any base that you operate for that fact. So certain airports you will see, because of 7-day scheduling, certain slots are more popular than others. So if you take, for example, an airport like Los Angeles, you will see that eventually when we start talking about modern era times when the jet planes are coming in, the slot times, I'd say the last 4 hours of the day between like 8 p.m. and midnight are generally going to start to disappear quite rapidly, purely because those are the kind of key times to schedule overnight flights to the East Coast or to Europe, and you will see there's a lot of possible routes go that way, and people will quickly pick up those slots, and over time those slots will become unavailable. People have to use them all up. You kind of have to know from experience which slots are more critical than others, and you will see when you start scheduling which slots are always tend to be gone more rapid than others. So keep an eye on that and understand what slot times are essential, especially if you're in a busy airport with a lot of competition where everybody will likely fly to. You want to make sure you grab those slots before the others do, so you can still schedule efficiently. The next point is I would say do not rush to open new bases. What I've seen many players do is that they have like 30 aircraft in their HQ, and then they decide, oh, I need to open another base and another base and another base. It's worth noting, for every base that you open, you need to start considering a lot of extra staff costs, and people will start to look at their income statement and think, oh yeah, but my base is profitable. But what they won't realize is that some of the additional costs for opening a base are allocated to the HQ costs. So your staff costs, for example, a lot of that will be allocated centrally. So typically, depending on what type of airport that you open, you need a certain amount of aircraft in that base before you start to recover the cost. So I would say always focus on your HQ first, fill that up as much as you can. If you start to run out of slots and you start to have aircraft grounded, then by all means start looking at another base, but my priority is always focused on my HQ. So the next one is kind of linked. So if you do need to open a base, take that into consideration, but also choose a base with a similar profile in terms of demands, in terms of aircraft that you can fly. So you want to make sure that you can use the same aircraft that you fly in your HQ. You can also fly them in your next bases. So choose airports with similar profiles, just to keep that commonality going, and make sure that you grow, and you don't have to start adding additional fleets just for the sake of a particular base. So keep an eye on the players already there. Will your aircraft fleet be compatible there and add the right sign of competition over there? Keep that in mind, would be my advice. When it comes to fuel hedges, a lot of people are tempted to start fuel hedging quite early on because they see one line pointing up. My general practice is I only use fuel hedges when I see both lines to start trending upwards. So if you start to see the red line and the green line both have a positive incline, then start to hedge by all means. I typically hedge for 12 months at a full 100%, but sometimes that will come back and bite me. But overall, when I play a long game world, my hedging is, I would say, about 70% spot on, and I do save quite a significant amount of money by doing these hedges. But I tend to stick to when I only see both lines forecasting upwards. Next point is around fuel contracts. So fuel contracts can be very lucrative, and if you were to start to look at my video on how to start up a game successfully, I kind of covered out what I do when it comes to a fuel contract. I typically wait for a long-term deal that becomes available at a high percentage, especially early in the game when you're starting to grow a lot. The price of a fuel contract will be cheap, so you want to make sure you get a good contract for a long time, and you'll get the big advantage in terms of when you grow. It hasn't taken that into consideration, but you'll get all that benefit. It's where fuel contracts only work on fuel from your own base, or not from a destination. So you kind of have to look at your fuel spend currently, divide that by half, because typically that's your outbound legs, and consider that as the base for your percentage savings calculation if you want to do the analysis. Next point is to understand your staff cost for your country and also the number of pilots per aircraft that you fly. So when it comes to Airwaysim, every country has a different setting in terms of their GDP and how the staff costs are relative to other ones. For example, if you have places like USA, Norway, Singapore, those are considered high salary costs relative to other countries like Algeria, South Africa, China. So you will see that there is a relative cost between different countries. And you've got to try and understand that as well, how those costs are relative. So for example, if we look at the aircraft in the jet age era, if people start to fly 707s with 4 pilots, people in for example Johannesburg will be able to fly them longer profitably than someone, for example, in the US, because simply the staff cost becomes very prohibitive for those aircrafts after a certain period of time, and you will see in certain airports they can fly for longer than others just purely because of that staff cost differential between various countries. And you can see that in the country page. For each country it has that setting, so you can see that. So when it comes to staff cost, they apply as soon as you add any flights to a schedule. So when you order an aircraft from the used market, it typically, it always takes 2 weeks unless you do some additional checks for it to arrive. Now many people, they will already start to schedule their flights and add the flights to it. And if it's a 30-minute day, 30 minutes per day in real life, it means that's 7 hours until the aircraft actually arrives. So there's 14 game days. But you will already start to pay staff cost for those 14 days without actually having the airplane earning you revenue. So especially early in the game, it's worth to hold off from scheduling until the aircraft actually arrives. Now I know that sometimes may be difficult because you need to sleep, or you're not going to be available in 7 hours when that aircraft arrives. But it's kind of, if you're online often, it's kind of weighing that difference, because all those extra costs that you're paying early on make that difference in early margin for you to grow more competitively as well. So bear that in mind. Try to hold off scheduling until you actually got the aircraft, unless you're not going to be around for a certain period of time. That point 28 is you can save about 1 or 2% margin in terms of staff costs when you manage it manually. But there's a big warning I got to give here. If you're not very focused on this, you could quickly hurt your airline even more by not managing this properly. Because if you schedule new flights and you don't add staff, or if you transition fleets, or if you're missing salary increases beyond a certain point, your staff will go on strike, and it will start to rapidly impact your company image, and it could quickly demise your airline. So this is more for a pro setting. You can manage your staff manually, and it does save you money. It also allows you to delay certain salary increases, because it's going to give you on a regular basis, your staff wants to have an increase by X%, and you can typically hold that off until the morale starts to drop to about 65, 70, and then you can give them the increase. So you kind of delay the salary increases, so you manage your margin that way. And it also gives you a good opportunity to know, okay, my margins for my salaries have gone up, I can maybe reset my pricing as well at the same time. But this point has to come with a big warning. If you're not going to be on top of the game, keep it to automatically by all means. But if you're going to be on top of the game, like every day checking thoroughly what's going on, you can save a few point percentage margin here by manually managing this. When it comes to point 29, new players often think about engine commonality, and in the real world, again, that would make sense. You want to make sure you have similar engines for the overhaul, all the maintenance. It would be more cost efficient in terms of spare parts and things like that. This, I feel, is not a huge factor in Airwaysim. The engine commonality costs are relatively low. It's not such an impact as fleet types, for example. So I wouldn't get obsessed by making sure you all have the same engine for aircrafts you get from the used market. It's much more important to get an aircraft rather than one that has the same engine type early on in the game. Um, so it's not really seen as a huge factor when it comes to your cost base. So my advice would be just don't get hung up about it. Just get the aircraft that's the same fleet type, and worry about engines maybe when you start to order new aircraft if that's what you want to do. And the final point in today's video is so I mentioned fleet type. So in a previous video, I'd always mentioned that typically do not fly more than 3 fleet types if possible. The fleet type only accounts when you have a schedule against it. So if you have the aircraft in storage and there's no schedules against it, or it's just sat there on the ground just biting at dust, so it's not actually going to cost you anything in terms of fleet commonality. But as soon as you schedule something, so as soon as you go to the schedule page for it and you put something on it, then you will see it becomes on your fleet commonality page as an aircraft that's in use, and then the cost will start to trigger. So if there's no schedules, you can have 5 fleet types, but as long as there's no schedule against it, they won't count towards it. But why would you want to do that, right? So it's important to know that if you want to transition, you can just put a fleet type, clear the schedules, and just hold it before you cancel the leases or sell all the aircraft. It's a way of managing transitions as well, if you want to do that. I hope these 10 tips, for example, were a good indicator in terms of some more advanced tips here than the ones I've previously shared. This should really, help you to run a successful airline. If you've got any questions, by all means leave a comment below. Keep an eye out for the next videos that will be following on from this, and I hope to see you soon. So don't forget to subscribe or like this video, and take care.